Hello there, and we roll to the end of another week, and here I am with Twiddle D and Twiddle Dam. I don't know why I hang out with these guys, but they're my friends, and we're talking about things
Could
that
be worse, George.
I'm not sure that I could do worse than you guys. We're talking about things we know nothing about and trying to solve the world's problems. You guys are dressed pretty normally today, both of you.
Yes.
This is quite impressive.
I don't know what you mean, but yeah.
He obviously had some important meetings.
Yeah, he doesn't. he doesn't have clothes that are. He doesn't have clothes that are the color that he names after foods.
No, I'm color blocking. It's summer.
Look, is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Well, but it looks pretty normal. It's okay.
Okay.
And what are you drinking?
Okay, I'm having Indian's finest tea, Assam, and it's beautiful.
I
You see
actually
the
like
color?
Assam tea. Actually,
Yeah,
it's a bit orange.
beautiful color.
Although yours
Yeah.
looks a bit dark, though. I'm sure it's not too strong.
Well, that's how we like it.
Anyway, on to more interesting things. What are we having?
As always, on this side of the table, we are having something much more interesting than Tinashe. And so we're having Mosi wine made by Zimbabwean in Cape Town.
Haven't we had this before?
We had the red wine.
No, we had the white at CZI, no?
No, we didn't. We didn't have the white. We had the red, and we were talking about the premiere of their documentary called Blind
Yes,
Ambition,
which is out now.
and yeah, it's out. It's fantastic, and it turns out they went to the competition again this year, and they did quite well. They beat South Africa and some other well-established wine countries, and
But they came 21st.
they came 21st. Yes, they did, but it's. I mean, given where they're coming from, I'm quite impressed with their performance. And I thought I would give a shout out to Joshua, who's the proprietor of Mosi Wines, and he was the team leader again this year. And he's got this particular white wine that it's a Chenin Blanc, but he's put Tinashe's name on it, not to honor our friend here,
Oh,
but to his other friend. It was
But I
inspired.
must say it's a beautiful name.
His other friend
are
Tinashe.
you gonna try some today?
No,
He's the guy who owns the Kumusha brand. He was also on the team this year, and so what's interesting about this particular bottle, if I can succeed in opening it,
Can you do two things at the same time?
is that
Have I mentioned before that this looks rather phallic?
it does. Is that he uses a Zimbabwean yeast to ferment the wine, and it gives it a distinct flavor.
Does that make any difference?
Oh yeah, it makes a difference.
Well, I'll tell you after I taste.
Oh,
For white wine, it certainly makes a difference. The first time I had it, it struck me. It's got very strong, bold flavors, and in fact, on scratching the surface a little bit, I learned that
because of yeast or because of Zimbabwean yeast?
No, smell it. Does all wine smell like that?
Yeah. I
Anyway.
wouldn't know the difference. I'm
Anyway.
not the best person to ask.
To blind ambition.
yes. Cheers to that.
You can raise your
No,
glass.
I believe,
maybe not.
no.
Anyway, so 24 years ago this month, Mwalimu Julius Nyerere died. Interesting character, end of an era of sorts, but also in his life, he was a guy who introduced his own philosophy about how Africans should live and how African economies should be run. Ran an experiment for about 20 years. When it was apparent it wasn't working, he stepped down in 1985, 85, 87.
Yeah, 86.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then went on to lead a peaceful, quiet life until his retirement 12, 13 years later. Thoughts, comments on?
I think it's the saddest bit about Tanzania. Some of the most horrible things that he implemented in socialism was to take away the English language and to try and teach in Swahili.
I think it was one of the
Yeah.
greatest things he did.
No, I think everywhere else in the world, there is no reason why you can't teach English and Swahili. But the idea that you totally remove a language and the teaching language becomes Swahili. If you remember, I know a very good friend of mine who was born in Tanzania and raised in Tanzania during that period, eventually had to migrate to Zimbabwe because the education system was pretty bad. And the idea of socialism is it then became free and you didn't have private schools. And the standards just collapsed totally. And they had to move a lot of the professionals, in terms of salaries, because you were working for government and it just wasn't proper. And a lot of them actually came to Zimbabwe.
We had a lot of them in the 80s.
In the 80s came primarily because of that, which is sad because if you look at the Tanzania, I mean, it's one of the countries I actually love. Diversity in
Yes,
terms
you're
of
a big fan
tourism.
of East Africa.
In terms of tourism,
One day you'll tell us why.
Yeah, one day. When we're old and gray. But, when you look at diversity in terms of just the economy itself, in terms of tourism, in terms of everything, they literally have everything. They've been blessed with everything. But it's a poor country. Why? It's primarily because of Ujamaa and what happened during that period.
So for you, he's a villain.
No, he's not a villain.
Oh.
I mean, there's no such thing as a villain, right? There's a good and bad in everyone. But I'm just saying from an economic perspective, he probably was not the best guy to have run Tanzania. But in terms of social cohesion, in terms of what he did for the liberation of the other
African countries,
frontline states, he was trailblazing as far as that's concerned. There's a book that's been done about him. It's quite a phenomenal read. Obviously, it paints him in a very
Hagiography.
Yeah, it is actually. But you get to understand what he was trying to do, his philosophies and things like that. He just wasn't good economically, I would say. But that he stepped down, it's fantastic because if you look at where Tanzania is right now, or East Africa, and I think we'll talk about this.
Are you pontificating, Tinashe?
I'm not Tinashe being Tinashe. Is that the question?
So I'm just saying it's a contested history.
Okay,
And
so
there's
for
good
you,
and
he's neither hero nor villain,
No,
or maybe he's a bit of both.
He's a bit of both. Economically villain, but socially a hero.
And for you?
Yeah, I tend to agree with Tinashe. I think what he demonstrates and a lot of revolutionaries demonstrate is the power of dogma to shape policy and how destructive the wrong kind of dogma is. So he is clearly a student of Marxism, of communism, and that's what inspired his version of economic policy. And that's why it failed miserably. And we can't really fault him too much for that because that's the indoctrination and training that he received. And so I think the lesson from him really is that leaders should be better students of history. Because by the time he came into power, all of Stalin's mistakes in terms of communalizing farming and the famine that resulted, they were out there in the public domain. He had access to that knowledge about where some of these economic policies had failed miserably. And yet he went on to experiment with these same policies in his own country and he hurt his people. So I think that's the lesson. He will always be, I think, charitably remembered as a lion of Pan-Africanism and the liberation of the front line states.
He did not become a tyrant, for one. The other thing I would like to support.
Well, he was a tyrant. It was a one-party state until he exited.
Yeah.
Anyway, so while we are in East Africa, we had a viewer write in, Tierra, and ask us to chime in on the idea of East African integration, particularly with their direction towards a common currency. And I think we've got a few examples to look at. You've got the European Union, the Eurozone. We've got our own WAPTA that we tried some 20 or 30 years ago. If you don't know what the WAPTA is, maybe you're too young to be watching the show, but Google will help you. And then we've got currently the Rand Monetary Union in Southern Africa. That's got 5 Southern African countries that use the Rand. And then you've got, I think, 15 or 20 Francophone West African countries that use a CFA franc or two versions of it that is basically a derivative of the euro, originally the franc. So what's our take? Do these things work?
Absolutely, absolutely, they do work. The number one thing is intertrade happens in US dollars, if you think about it, because that's the
Common
dominant currency, or the reserve currency, or the currency that everybody has some confidence in trading. But the minute you have a monetary union, you don't need to use the US dollars. So you can use a local currency or whatever the common currency would be. And that will boost trade substantially.
Do you think the Germans agree with you? Do you think the Germans are happier with the euro than they were with the mark?
I think
the Dutch.
I think
in hindsight, would the Dutch have given up guilders?
Yeah, I think the Dutch would have a problem, but I don't think the Germans would have a problem, because if we really think about it, the euro is a derivative of the Dutch. And
you mean the mark? Yeah, the Deutsche Mark.
Yeah, the Deutschmark. It's really a derivative. So Germany less so, but I think that the other countries would have a problem with the euro, that they now tied themselves to Germany and what actually happens in Germany. But Germany itself, I think, wouldn't have a problem with that. So literally, it's like Germany now can print its own currency for the rest of the euro, whereas previously they would, for the trade, would have happened in US dollars. So you think about it. Before the euro, trade between Netherlands and Germany would have happened in US dollars.
Or in sterling.
Or in sterling. Yeah, but probably in US dollars, because that's the reserve currency. And then post-euro...
Sterling used to be.
These are not the empire days. These are not the empire days.
Once upon a time.
But interestingly,
before
you know what
people
the
were
rate
running
was?
Offside. No more wine for you.
Well, it happened before the black man, if you think about it. Because you know what the rate was between the pound and the US a decade ago?
Close
1 to 2.
Yeah, close to two.
Yeah, exactly.
No,
And that-
no, about 165 10 years ago.
I'm just having a bit of fun at the former chancellor as expensive.
It's about the time that we
Roundabout.
were both in
Yeah,
Europe.
exactly.
About 165.
Or 180 something. But anyway, the point that we're trying to make is immediately when you have the Eurozone, you start trading in, and that's why I said Germany. For Germany, it worked out fantastically well, because they were now...
So coming closer to home, you're saying if East Africa does it, they're going to be tying themselves to Kenya. If we do it, we're tying ourselves to South Africa.
Absolutely. The dominant economies in a particular country. And you would want to do that. If you're Uganda, if you're Tanzania, why wouldn't you want to tie yourself to Kenya, which is your largest trading partner anyway?
They've got this little habit of hacking each other to death every once in a while.
That's uncharitable. But
Very
look,
uncharitable. Very uncharitable.
but look,
And disingenuous, Foti. The argument that just doesn't hold. Because we're talking about economics here. And it's the dominant.
Look, African countries are small and poor on the global stage, and there are lots of examples, with Zimbabwe being foremost amongst them, of countries failing miserably to manage their own currencies.
Not anymore, eh?
And
not anymore. There are not very many countries that still fail to manage their currencies.
Yeah,
I mean, when you live in Zim, you think that there's a lot of other countries like us, but no.
Yeah, there are maybe less than 10, actually.
yeah, and so if you use Europe as an example, I think Tinashe is absolutely right that there's more trade, it's easier, and apart from not having certain control, they're actually better off from an economic standpoint for having the euro. But I think the euro is actually not an ideal example. If you actually the best example in my mind is the United States, right? It's made up of 50 states, and they all use the same currency. They're very different economies in each of the states. They're different demographics. They could very easily be different independent countries, but they work seamlessly using the US dollar, and there is no question that they're much better off for this. And
It's one sovereign.
yes, it's one sovereign, but
Yes,
And
I think that's an important
That's
point.
an important point.
but it's
the euro is not.
it's a federation. They've got state and
But
local
they
governments.
don't have different fiscal policies.
Well, not necessarily, because the states actually do.
They have their own budgets.
They
They have their
have
own
their own-
laws. They have their own.
the comp- the-
The point is, you just need one person to direct what must happen.
So the way
Whereas the euro didn't take that. If you look at Charles de Gaulle, when the idea of the euro started, I think 1957, 1956, 57,
Okay.
until the 70s. And these were the issues that they had to deal with, right? Because you're not one sovereign.
Yeah,
Whereas
no,
US
I
is
hear you,
one
but
sovereign.
the point I wanted
So
to
you
drive
just-
here is that so the European countries were actually quite wealthy by the time they got together to form the EU and to form a common currency.
Portugal,
Have you,
Portugal,
have you forgotten what used to happen with is this the Italian lira?
the Italians, the
the
Portuguese.
No, but
Portuguese.
even if you look at the pigs in Europe, right? Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain, the poorest cousins.
Not anymore, but you have the
you know,
Eastern European.
if you compare them to the wealthiest African countries per capita, they're doing so much better. Okay.
Now,
No, even then.
no, you're right, but volatility, the currency volatility.
So my point is, coming together from this position where they already had modern first world economies to have more seamless trading in the EU was kind of like a luxury, whereas we are poor in this part of the world, and we desperately need to make faster progress in economic
fair enough.
development.
Fair enough.
So the idea that we still have these petty squabbles about, well, my sovereignty and this, that, and the other, it's really an indictment on leadership in
but
Africa.
Okay, and I think that's a very good point and a fair point. But you understand that for a monetary union to work, or a currency union to work properly, it has to become one monetary system. So the right to print money goes away completely.
Which is fantastic.
The ability to print money goes away completely. You lose control of your inflation, and if you really must make it
It
work,
doesn't
which
completely go away, but it goes away from the individual country, but it now
It's
sits
centrally.
somewhere.
and if you follow it to its logical step, you must lose fiscal control as well, because you cannot be running different deficits.
Actually, yeah.
There must be one fiscal budget or one set of fiscal parameters. So I mean, you
Otherwise
talk
we
about
become
this.
a Greece.
Yes, and this is a problem that Europe has, that everybody's running different deficits, and there's rules, and France just says, well, we don't care about the rules, we're going to do what we like, and Britain says, well, we want a separate set of rules for ourselves. It doesn't work. If you really want to make it work, then it's got to be the American system.
I agree,
Absolutely.
and
But that's never going to happen.
But it's an ideal that we should aspire to.
I think that when you look at the condition of the world right now,
Ujamaa was
it's
an
just-
ideal.
Yeah, it's just not. It's never going to happen. This idea of a unitary United States of Africa is just never going to happen. The other thing I wanted to highlight about a common monetary union is when you look at reserves. Right now, everyone has to individually build their reserves in gold or in US dollars.
Or in minerals.
This is the real world, boss. This is the real world.
25 million per annum at a time.
Coal.
You know, and the point that you're making is when you're one country, you're actually exposed and susceptible to a lot of currency hits or a lot of the vagaries, you know, and extremely vulnerable. Whereas now, when you're a big collective, actually you can protect yourself, right?
Or you can be rogue like Greece and just benefit from everybody else being disciplined.
Well, if you think about it, Greece actually benefited from the EU because the bailout actually came from
That's what I mean.
Germany.
That's what I mean. You can be rogue, but everybody else must chip in to sort out
To sort out your problem.
mess.
Yeah, you're right. The other thing about the francophone countries, where the
CFA. Frank.
CFA franc has done phenomenally well. If you think about it, they have the problem that we sometimes have of coups and all sorts happening, but it never affects their
currency.
monetary policy. It actually does.
Do you know that DRC has almost no inflation?
That's interesting.
because it's dollarized.
No, but also they use the CFA franc. I mean, even in their domestic currency, they don't have inflation.
So I think those are some of the huge benefits that East Africa. And if you think about it, elsewhere you have coups, you have instability, but in East Africa it's been relatively stable. So if they had a strong monetary policy, and if they could trade amongst
You've
themselves,
never heard about the Great Lakes region, have you?
yes, I think that's
An aberration.
well, not
Well,
an aberration.
that's
their continuous
that's three of the six
problem.
countries in the EAC.
Yeah, that's their continuous problem. But can we agree that they've somewhat managed that risk? It's built in, it's baked in. So when you think about East Africa, it's baked in. That risk has already been discounted. We know that it exists, and it's already been discounted.
We're not going to go down this rabbit hole. We're going to go for a break instead. But Tierra, thank you for giving us something to discuss. And by all means, other viewers, if you've got things that you'd like us to look into and discuss on the show, we'll be glad to. Please write in and give us your suggestions. We'll be right back. And we're back. Are you guys suitably refreshed?
Indeed, we are. What do you make of the wine?
I like it, and I think you are right. It's a little bit unusual.
Indeed.
On the nose, it's a little bit unusual on the
On the
palate,
palate, yeah.
but also on the eye. It's called a straw.
Oh, right.
Libby would be proud of me. The color of it.
She owes me tea.
Can you call her? You've got her number. Why are you
Telling us.
Why you bring this up on the show? Anyway, so Zimstat has been busy this year, and I think we must give them some credit. Eh? They've actually been working, releasing figures that are somewhat credible, I think.
Don't know about credibility, but they have been producing numbers.
And during the course of this week, they released GDP numbers. And I must say, in all my grown-up adult life, this is the first time I've ever seen the GDP numbers being released so transparently.
No, they always do so.
No,
They've
you're an
been doing
economic
so.
geek,
All right.
so
okay.
you've known where at the back of the
Well,
library
I
to go
think,
find
yeah,
it.
I think I totally agree with you that that's the era of social media. It's easier to access these numbers.
And I mean, what do we make of these numbers? So, I mean, for me, so one of the things that was striking was when you look at the fastest growing sectors, if you exclude hospitality, because obviously that's got a very aggressive comeback from COVID. The fast growing sectors, number one was energy. But they do put electricity and gas in the same category. So I don't know whether
They are energy.
I don't know whether that's ZESA or cooking gas that is driving that, which would be interesting because there's an inverse.
So no, it's not cooking gas. Cooking gas will be under manufacturing.
No, not cooking oil.
Yeah.
Cooking gas, LPG.
Oh, all right. Have we started producing any of that?
No, we
import
import
it
them
and
in retail.
Yeah, so it will be part of our.
So you think it's ZESA? That's
Yeah, no.
ZESA's contribution to
Wange.
GDP is
No. When you look at Wange, Wange is up. It hasn't
some
been
of
up.
the time.
Yeah, some of the some of the time. There was Kariba, the south.
Yeah.
And
I was
then
actually in
there's
Kariba a few weeks
Wange.
ago. It's quite impressive, eh?
Yeah, and there's Wange. So yeah.
Yeah,
but
okay.
I tend to agree with those.
But what was interesting, number two was social work. It's got a long name, social work, blah, 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 blah. But my understanding of it is NGOs.
Yes.
That's the second fastest growing sector in our economy.
That's cause for concern.
You think?
Absolutely. If the economy is doing well, then we need less handouts and less NGOs.
And okay, he missed the sarcasm. It's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. He's a 6-year-old. And number 3 was agriculture. Third fastest growing, after hospitality, third fastest growing.
But from what kind of base, and what kind of?
But I mean,
growth?
we
When you
said-
talk about
Could
fast-
we discuss the numbers? Because I've got a lot to say about these numbers.
Okay, so go ahead. Oh no, okay, wait. Before you do, no, the fourth fastest growing sector was admin, which I interpret as government.
Yeah, government.
How's government growing?
Yeah, they're
Getting
crowding out
bigger.
everybody.
It's getting bigger.
Anyway, yes, okay. You'd like to pontificate? Please go ahead.
I would love to pontificate about the numbers because there's a story that a lot of people just perhaps will not understand. If you look at the way they've rebased their GDP numbers to 2019,
Yes.
and I looked at their inflation that they've used between 2019 and 2020, it's 550%, an increase of 550%. That was the inflation rate, and I think that's somewhat believable.
Yeah.
Could have been higher, but I think we can
It's
believe
decent.
that number. It's decent enough. But what is very instructive is between 2020 and 2021, when the inflation rate that they've used is actually 130%. Now, the 130%, yes, that's the real number that we got from Zimstats.
Zimstats.
But unfortunately, that was the subsidized rate. We know that inflation was much more than that because remember, between 2020 and 2021, that's when we had the auction, and the auction rate was
It didn't move for the
it
longest
didn't
time.
move for the longest time. So if you look at the real economy, while they say that between 2020 and 2021 it grew by 7.8%, if you dig through the numbers, if you use
It
the
could be
actual,
lower.
it's actually lower. Now, why you will be worried, or why we should be worried actually, is if you look at which sectors did inflation or were infected or affected by inflation the most. If you look at current prices, GDP in wholesale retail would be 23%.
Yes, it's a quarter
But-
of the economy.
Yeah, but when you take away inflation, it reduces to 19%.
Which is what it was in 2019.
So you know what it's telling us? It's telling us that actually in the wholesale sector, there was a lot of price controls. That's why its contribution, when you factor in inflation, actually reduces. And in agriculture, they didn't suffer as much from price controls, agriculture. So that's why the contribution in agriculture, in real terms, is actually going up to about 12%.
Okay, I don't want to make this a rabbit hole, but my reading of the numbers was actually the opposite. But okay, we can do a rabbit hole on this.
Okay, so let me simplify it for you. You're saying that if there was no inflation, if you use nominal numbers, wholesale contribution to our economy was 23%.
Mm.
But if you consider inflation, its contribution was way less. It means that in that particular sector, they were impacted heavily by.
No, so the way I read it is the opposite
All right,
because
okay.
they actually didn't care about the auction rate. So in nominal terms, they charged the real price. So
No.
everybody else's numbers, I guess our conclusion is the same. Everybody else's numbers are depressed because they used the auction rate in their pricing.
But retail would have used the auction rate. Remember,
Okay,
when
you guys sound like
SI
you
No,
went down a
we're
rabbit
going
hole.
we're getting
It's
we're
like
getting-
I thought
no,
the
we're
most
getting down a rabbit
interesting
hole.
thing
We're going down a
about
rabbit hole.
the GDP numbers is the fact that in real terms, our economy is growing.
Yeah, but he's
But
contesting that.
that's.
He's contesting that.
So let's
I'm
let's
just saying, just put
let's
the
zoom out
the
and just
correct-
and
if you
have
put
that
the correct-
conversation.
So when you recompute it, what do you think is the growth?
It's actually close to no growth at all,
That's
and that's
how
somewhat-
I interpreted it as well.
yeah,
I-
exactly.
I
If you-
interpreted
if you-
If you looked at 2019 and 2021, I interpreted it to be a standstill position.
Yeah, because there was negative growth, and primarily because of the inflation rate. The inflation rate that they used was high, right? And then the inflation rate that they used between 2020 and 2021 was 130%. But we know that the real inflation rate was slightly higher than that. What's worrying is what's going forward. That's the first thing that I picked up. The second thing that is worrying when you're looking at the sectors that have grown and you're looking at the sectors that have declined, which we didn't get into. But
'Cause
this
you
is the
shut me up.
worrying. This is the worrying bit. Is when you look at ICT, for example, it had been the fastest growing sector in the last decade. Now it grew from 2% in 2010 to 2018 when it was like 7.5% contribution
GDP,
of
yeah.
GDP. It's now come down to
declining.
3.7%. That is extremely
No,
worrying.
that is a direct reflection of the price controls. Because
Well, there's that.
we're all phoning as much as we used to.
Yes.
Perhaps
But-
more
but-
because
but we're
it's
not-
cheaper.
But we're not
in real
generating.
terms.
We're not generating the revenue for the MNOs.
You're quite right, George. There is a direct result of price controls, but also the sector is just not growing, unfortunately. And that to me is
The sectors I found concerning not to be growing were ICT,
financial
manufacturing,
services.
financial
Manufacturing has actually improved. Yeah, if you consider, but I do get your point because they got the
No, it's
bulk of the subsidies.
Okay, yes, it improved in absolute numbers, but its contribution to the overall declined. Banking declined.
Yes,
Mining
finance.
declined in its contribution. Finance
No,
declined.
mining actually increased.
No, its contribution came down. In absolute numbers, it went up.
No, even its contribution is now
Okay.
to almost 18%. It's 12 point something percent. It used to be for the decade. And why mining has actually increased is because of commodity prices.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. So again, it's and this is the interesting bit. Do you realize that our GDP numbers are impacted severely
by commodity numbers.
by prices?
Of course, but everybody's
And
GDP
that's the
numbers are.
big- No, because actually, when we look at GDP, essentially, because that could have been our other argument that Zimstats would have done. They would have said, you know what, a lot of this was purely because of price increases, but we're going to take it out and let's see how the mining sector actually did.
Whether they produced more.
No, but
Whether they
no, but
actually
I, no, I,
produce
but no, but I
more
think
or they didn't.
I think you're being unfair
Uh-huh.
because that's you're being unfair to
Yeah,
Zimstats.
yeah, it is.
You're being
It
unfair
is
to
what it
Zimstats.
is.
It's
No,
just
no,
what
it is. It is what it is. Granted, but the fact is, we can actually explain it. That it seems like our GDP numbers, the impact of prices, is great on our GDP numbers, and that's worrying.
I think the point.
So
I think the point you're
that-
trying to make, which is an important point, which is that the higher up we go in the value chain of anything, the further we move from commodities and the closer we get to services, the more constant our pricing will be.
Yes.
But because we're exporting
So much.
so much primary commodities and we rely on so much on primary industries, we're very vulnerable to commodity cycles.
Not just that, even the wholesale sector is affected by.
So basically,
prices.
if I'm hearing you guys correctly, what we're saying is that for various reasons, our GDP numbers are not the best indicator for the health of our economy.
Yes, but economists have been saying this for decades.
Yeah, but I think it's,
And everybody's been
I think
looking
it's-
for a better
it's-
indicator. Which
I think it's especially true in our circumstances because, firstly, the numbers
Well,
themselves.
that's not what I'm saying, but that's another.
Well, I'll make that case
argument.
because
Yeah, please do.
because of the dual nature of our economy, where we have a hard currency economy.
I wouldn't even use the word dual. I'd say plural
Okay,
because there's many prices. There's many.
let's use
there's many-
whichever adjective George likes.
Yes.
Right. So so translating that into one currency, and then computing a GDP number on that. I mean, so the final product, and this is not an indictment of the work that's being done by Zimstats. I think that they've been dealt a really bad hand in terms of having to put these numbers together with all these distortions and complexities. So it's is it so from the perspective of somebody running a business or trying to make decisions for Q4 2022 and looking into 2023, how useful is GDP? Because notwithstanding that
it's a vector analysis.
Yeah.
What we're saying is what we glean from those numbers is generally where the economy is growing or where it's going.
But
right?
can
The
we
direction.
yeah,
We can. We can actually say ICT. We can say that. Perhaps the magnitude is what we can debate, but that it used to be a big contributor to our GDP, and it's no longer. That is a factor. But the point I really wanted to
I'll
make.
push back on that, and he actually pointed this out that there's a distortion there with price controls. Maybe the ICT
But that's
sector,
exactly-
in terms of its output, has grown, but because they can't
No, it
invoice at prices that they like, when you work out the numbers, you're not looking at the output, you're looking at the numbers, the Zim dollars, right? And those would be smaller, so the contribution is smaller.
I think
but
I
I
think this is a rabbit hole. What would be very interesting is if viewers could come in and chime in with their views. I mean, so do price controls reducing a sector actually mean there's less activity and therefore the GDP number is right, or is it misleading?
Okay, so the point I wanted to make.
We're leaving it to the viewers, and we're gonna go for a break now.
But I didn't make my point.
Okay,
You can't make all your points, especially if you use half the time pontificating.
There's one fundamental point that we need to highlight, which is that just because one sector has done badly, another sector will be doing well.
Mhm.
That's why the GDP number is a good reflection of our economy. So just because ICT has gone down, and we can correctly attribute it to price controls, but we saw agriculture, for example, doing phenomenally well according to the numbers. So it balances out that the GDP number becomes a correct reflection.
so there's
Now-
real growth in our country.
No.
Stand still.
Stand still.
Over 2 years. Can we go for a break?
Well, even over.
Is it okay with you if we go for a break?
Yeah, no. Sure.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
We'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Sawira huya timburangana timburunga tichine mkana handirambe ishe ninobvuma kana mati yangu nguva yakwana sawira huya timburangana timburunga tichine mkana daita isiva ramangwana taingovhunza ndewani mukana dainda isiva ramangwana taingovhunza nderani jana sawira uya timborangana timboronga tichine mugana sawira uya timborangana timboronga tichine mugana daita isiva ramangwana taingovhunza ndewani mugana dainda isiva ramangwana taingovhunza nderani jana sawira uya timborangana timboronga tichine mugana.
And we're back, suitably refreshed, I
Indeed.
hope. Are you calm?
Totally.
Would you like to take a deep breath?
Yeah.
Can I
A sip of
can I
my-
just
Oh no, please not.
this might
Please,
help your
please,
mood.
please.
So elsewhere in the news this week, I'm really liking Zimstat in its current incarnation. So this week they gave us a bit more color on the census and talked about education. Your thoughts? I won't even bother because you've got something you want to discuss anyway, right?
Yeah. So I think the caveat there, or the disclaimer that we need to highlight quite early on, is this is self-reporting.
Yes.
So when they say that,
And it's not even quite self-reporting. It's whoever was at home.
yeah, whoever was at home.
Yeah.
So if they say, for example, the literacy rate is 93%, and that 93% is self-reporting, do we really? I'm worried, because if it's 93% self-reporting, what's the actual reality?
Well, but they've told you
It's
how they define
probably-
literacy. They've said anyone who's gone to grade 3.
No, it's self-reporting. So they went to a house and they asked, "Did your kids get to grade 3?" And somebody would have said, "Yeah, sure, they did. They went to school up to grade 3," or they have some sort of
Okay, so there's some bias in the numbers.
there's extreme bias. But I'm saying if it's self-reporting,
Extreme.
if it's self-reporting and our literacy rate is 93%, if you can discount it, it means in actual reality is somewhere around 80%. And that's actually the World Bank number. The World Bank number is actually 82%.
Okay, you're going somewhere with this, right?
Yeah, the point is it's a problem,
Okay.
right? It's a real problem
It's
because
our
our literacy
literacy rate.
problem, our literacy rate used to be 99% at some point.
Or based on the same self-reporting. So
Yeah, based
Yes.
on the self-reporting.
it's come down. So
It's come down.
okay. Yeah, I found that interesting. The literacy's come down. I found it interesting that the whole country only has 5,000 PhDs. Less, 4,800 and something.
That's a good thing.
No,
We're not a fan of academics.
No. I actually.
But
it doesn't mean anything.
No,
That's the point
I'll
I'm trying to
tell-
make.
No, I'll tell you what it does mean. It might not mean what people think it means, but what it tells you is we haven't created knowledge.
We say that PhDs create knowledge.
Well, we do know that they do. For you to earn a PhD, you must say something new. You must research and prove something new. You might not think they've created much.
Okay, that's hilarious.
Anyway,
You know that you can get a PhD in literature, right?
yes. Okay. Anyway, we're not going down this rabbit hole. Anyway, I found it interesting. We only have 5,000 PhDs. What I also found interesting. Can you guys behave? What I also found interesting is we have over 100,000 engineers. But what have we innovated? What
To be fair,
problems have the engineers solved?
What they meant is the number of people between the ages of 15 and 24 or above the age of 15 who are in engineering, who are
Yes.
studying engineering.
No,
So,
who have?
yeah, but you could be studying engineering.
Yes, no, fine,
You're
but
included
it was still one of the highest. Out of all the professions, the highest was business related studies. Believe it or not, then business related studies and law, and then education, and then engineers.
Yeah.
So we know we've got lots of teachers.
But and also
We
when
see-
we say engineers, it means even the trade.
Yes,
The trades as well.
fine. Yes, and welders and whatever, they're all
Yeah,
in there.
exactly.
But it's still the biggest group of people that we have. What practical solutions have we come up with to our problems?
We've exported them. So
No, these are the people that were there on that
they're
night.
still in training. I think the majority are still in training. And
I don't
they
think so. I don't think the entire.
But even if they're all graduates, I would bet that if they have half a chance to emigrate,
they should
like
do so.
Africa,
No, but you guys
to Europe,
are avoiding the question. If this is the biggest,
We're not.
if this is the third largest number of
they-
people that
they're not, they're not
that were
here
trained.
trying to make a long-term career for themselves. They are just passing through.
An
Okay, I'll-
unemployed engineer is
Okay, I'll give you a practical scenario. I know you guys don't like anecdotes, but I must dumb it down to anecdotes for you.
Okay, go ahead.
You've got these 100,000 people that have done some sort of engineering education, even if they're first semester students, right?
or A-level student.
No, there isn't. Okay.
Okay.
It's anyone above
Okay,
the age of 15.
Let's say let's say even A-level students. If you go to their rural homes, how are they fetching water? Yes, they've got all these fantastic plans to migrate to the States and whatever, and they're doing their visas. How are they fetching water in their rural homes?
I suspect
Well,
with a bucket.
Like the 16th century.
What is
It's
the
a feudal.
what is the state of how?
So can I help you there?
Yes.
And you
Yeah,
are
he
right.
definitely needs help.
Yeah, you need the help. You are right. And this is the difference between talent or knowledge and upskilling, right? And the skill set. So just because you have the knowledge, especially with your PhDs, you might have.
We only have 5,000 of them.
That's why I said it was an irrelevant number. But it's knowledge, but unless you apply it, then you don't have a skill. So I didn't have a problem. I actually thought it was a good thing that we have a lot of people who realize that eventually they're going to leave this country, and an important skill set that they should pick up is engineering or engineering related.
What are they doing with it?
Oh, no. Right now they're just acquiring the knowledge. So I don't have a problem with it.
No, I think a lot of them are beyond acquiring the knowledge.
Well, they're not applying it
Yes, why aren't
But-
they?
because you don't have the skills.
I find this very concerning, Tinashe, and
You can have knowledge and not the skill.
And I'm a bit surprised that you're the one who's making excuses for them. Guys,
No, I'm not.
one of our biggest social problems, right? If you read a lot of these government reports and how they measure development and stuff, and NGO reports, a big social problem that we still have that is measured by the government and is a cause of concern for the government is open defecation. It's a real social issue in this country that there's people that go out of their house and go into the bush.
Can I ask you a question?
And we've got 100,000.
Of them that cannot solve this because it's knowledge. Okay, do you have the difference?
Okay, I'll
between-
make a different case from the knowledge case. I understand where he's coming from, and he's making sense. But I
To
think
you,
there's
maybe.
there's an even more basic problem, which is, I mean, we have graduates, university graduates in our country who are vendors. Why are they vendors if they've got a university degree, right? Because before you tinker in your garage and figure out a better solution to open defecation, you actually have to feed yourself. You have to clothe yourself. You have to. You've got
They don't have the
basic
skill set.
So even if you do have the skill set, right, you need to actually be in a position to have the time, energy, and a little bit of capital to devote yourself to particular problems, like the one you've mentioned, right? They're not in that position. They can hardly look after themselves. So how do you expect them to spend any amount of time focused on a problem, such as
So you guys
building
went through,
toilets?
You guys went through auditing firms. Can I ask you a question? What was the difference between a guy who's starting to do his articles from a university, so studied accounting, and a guy who, after A level, actually learned the trade, and they're more or less the same age? Who had a skill and who had knowledge?
Yeah, that's a fantastic example, because what you'd find is,
But you know we're
the-
biased, right?
the-
No,
we're not
it's
biased.
not being
No, but
biased.
this is
It's not being biased.
because the
That's the
institution-
difference between knowledge and skill.
because the graduate is coming in after 3 or 4 years of university, and they're in first year with a degree, and by the time you and I were in fourth year, we had been in the firm for
4
3
years.
years, and so not only did we have some of the academic knowledge, we actually had been on the ground learning.
But you had a
And these
skill.
guys, whenever they came into the firm, they went up faster because they were graduates, but they certainly started off as our juniors.
Exactly. So, and that's the point. The point is, you still employed them, and the reason why you employed them, you did not employ an auditor. When the guy is coming from the UZ, he didn't say, "Oh, look at me, I'm an auditor," and yet he had an accounting degree. But what went through the process, those 2 or 3 years, is he was now acquiring a skill.
Minimum 3 years.
3 years. There you go, minimum 3 years. He was now acquiring a skill, and only after acquiring a skill did he consider himself
And
an auditor. Similarly with an engineer. Just because you've got that qualification does not make you an engineer. You've got knowledge. You know how hydraulics works, right?
I still don't understand why you can't solve your own water problem at your house.
Because knowledge,
okay,
to transfer knowledge
do you
to
think-
skill
do you think-
is very difficult.
Do you think you need a budget to solve a problem like water? Like if you're waking up every morning with a bucket to go and get water someplace, right? And because you've got an engineering degree, you know that there are better ways of doing this. Can you do that? Can you solve that problem with a zero budget?
Or just because you've got a Shona degree does not make you an author.
Okay, anyway, we're gonna move on. Elsewhere in the news this week, Cabinet has approved, as a recommendation, and I'm not entirely sure what it means when Cabinet approves a recommendation, but Cabinet has approved as a recommendation an across-the-board minimum wage of $150. Contextually, the country with $150 minimum wage in Africa is Botswana. And I think the only other country higher than Botswana is South Africa.
GDP per capita is like 16,000.
It's a proper middle income country.
So I think firstly, I'm just going to attack this from a conceptual standpoint. Do minimum wages make sense? Why have a minimum wage in the first instance?
When you've got, what's the percentage unemployment? 60%?
Yeah, I mean, you have 2.5 million youths that are unemployed.
So I personally believe that minimum wages do more harm than good. So any minimum wage, whatever number you put on it. Ironically, the reason why politicians like minimum wages is because they want to help societies least and most vulnerable from exploitation. But wherever this has been studied empirically, those are the people who suffer the most when a minimum wage is introduced. Because if somebody is running a business in which they're employing, say, 5 people, and they're paying them $100, and they wake up tomorrow and they now have to pay them $150.
So to me, conceptually, my issue is a little different, on the same wavelength, but a little bit different. That the wage, a minimum wage, actually protects those that are actually employed, and it's a disadvantage to those who are not employed, right? So it's actually setting up a barrier to entry. So it helps those who are employed, but when your majority of people are actually unemployed, it means you can't get them work.
But I understand where you're coming from, but you missed something about the
It
employment.
also hurts people who are employed, by the way. So if I'm running a business and I'm a cutthroat capitalist, and the cost of my labor goes up, if I'm paying people $100 and because of a government
50%.
mandate, I now have to pay them $150, what do you think I'm going to do in terms of the way I run my business?
So where it was coming from was unionized labor. So minimum wage came from unionized labor. So you couldn't even
Retrench.
or
No, but
fire.
and I understand where you come from, and that's the point I wanted to make. That there's different categories of employment, and we have short-term contracts. So every employer who employs a significant number of people has a mix between permanently employed people, short-term contracts, and medium-term contracts. So the first people that are going to get cut are the short-term contracts. You don't have to retrench them. One day you just say thank you very much, please don't sign another form, go home. And then it goes down to the people that are not yet employed, because if there's no minimum wage, I'm going to think, oh, you know what if I tried this? What if it works? And I'm going to find a youngster who I say, can you try this thing? If it works, I'll give you $10. And we're going to reach a bilateral agreement to try it. But if the moment I think about it, I think, oh, let me try and make wine in my garage, I must immediately realize that I've got a $150 cost every month.
Or automate.
Wages should be set by the market. I can't understand this idea that there's a bureaucrat somewhere whose lived experience is very different from people at the bottom of the food chain, twiddling with a Excel spreadsheet, saying, okay, yeah, I think, yeah, 150.
But even the unions, Tinashe, don't they realize that the more people are employed, the more subscriptions they get, and the more twin cabs they can buy for themselves?
No, they don't realize that. They actually create those barriers to entry, because they realize that actually they need to protect the people who are paying subscriptions. That's their number one goal, not to increase the subscription.
They have perverse incentives.
Yeah,
which is why unions all over the world are actually getting weaker and they make less sense, and they're always embroiled in these scandals.
South Africa is a classic example.
Okay, elsewhere in the news, Christmas, Public Service Medical Aid Society. That's how people say it. Public Service Medical Aid Society, the largest medical aid society in the country, closed down its hospitals and pharmacies because it had no money to pay staff and it had no drugs.
Is this the same institution that used to pay its CEO $500K a month?
Maybe.
Yeah. But this is a classic case of a moral hazard. So government creates inflation, right? And that's what's actually affecting the medical aid society, right? Because you create inflation and eventually your contributions actually are meaningless. And then once it shuts down, the same government now gives a $1 million rescue.
But I mean, what's $1 million?
Yeah. What's $1 million
for?
Right? And if it wasn't for inflation,
I mean, they're running
the
2 or 3
organization would be
big
okay.
hospitals.
No, but I hear where you're coming from, but I think that that's not the fundamental problem here. Because let me finish.
Okay, let him put across his arguments and then you...
Because the public service medical aid is it's the only large medical aid that's actually failing, right? The other medical aids seem to be operating as decent going concerns.
There's no other medical aid that is nearly their size.
Okay, so by far the biggest.
Subscriptions have been affected by inflation.
No, but my point is
every government employee, every living government pensioner
is a customer of the public service medical aid. Yes, I get that. The point I want to make, if you'll allow me, is that government has no business running medical aid society.
And it doesn't.
No, it doesn't. It's a society.
It's a parastatal.
No, it's
they
not.
appoint the board.
No, it's
the
not.
management.
No, it's not. They like to think they do, but they don't. It's a society.
It's a society. It's got members, and the members are the ones who run that.
It's got a rule book, just like
the problem
the
is
other one.
government. The payments come from government, right?
They come late.
They come late or not at all. And then, more importantly, if the civil servant's salary is not keeping up with inflation, means that the subscription is not keeping up with inflation. That's the core problem.
No. The core problem is,
Whereas every other medical
so
aid
what you guys might-
society,
are saying might be true, de jure, that on paper it's run by members. In reality, de facto,
No,
it's run by the government.
No, Rufaro. They have an AGM. You don't read you write news. You should
No, I
read the
don't,
news.
but
You should read the news.
if
They have an
I
AGM.
suspect if it was run by members, it would be much better run.
No, the problem is
where the money is coming from.
okay. So
It's
think.
one check.
Okay.
At the
And
end of
I don't want to put you on the spot and for you to say the number on camera. Think how much you spend on your family's medical aid every month, and then think that the average civil servant is maybe earning $150, $180 as their salary. So what do you think is their medical aid contribution?
Whatever it is, the question here is not the quantum per member, it's how it's then applied once it's received.
But what can you do with it? If your private medical arrangement for you and your kids and your people to be happy costs you whatever it costs, and is there a scenario in which somebody who's earning $180 is going to be happy with any more than say 20 or 30% of their salary going towards their medical aid contribution? And then what can you do with that 20 or 30%?
Yeah, but that. So how would
And
they
that
run it?
check does not come on time. That's the other factor. And it comes as Zim dollars. And you're not allowed to trade on the Paro market.
Yeah, but which is why they invested in all these service providers.
But the
right
medicine-
to cushion
the
themselves.
medicine-
No, but the
Everything
medicine
is
comes from India. The X-ray, you might have the X-ray machine, but you need X-ray sheets. You need an X-ray technician who needs to put fuel in her car.
Okay, let's start from
Okay,
first principles. Because
so-
I want to
okay,
push
first
back.
principle.
I want to push back.
First principle would be this. Why is it the same organization during dollarization worked?
And could pay 500,000 to see her.
Could. And then suddenly...
Did it though?
Yeah,
Did it actually work?
yeah,
it actually did. It worked. Very
I mean,
well.
your parents and my parents are retired civil servants. And during dollarization, did we worry about their care?
It actually worked very well.
Yeah,
In fact, Western Hospital at some point was better than
The private
other
ones.
Private ones.
Okay, so
Because they were getting real money. And then
As
suddenly,
as
when
recent
the
as 2
currency
years ago.
changed-
As recent as 2 years ago. I mean, we've had this discussion on the show, or not on the show, but among us. My dad was in intensive care at West End a couple of years ago, and it was free. Christmas paid everything, and the care was very good. We're all extremely comfortable with it. The shortfalls were negligible.
It's a question of inflation. This is the impact of high inflation. I mean, if you think about civil servants, do you know that the real reason why people went into civil service was purely for the pension? Because civil service pension
Was good.
was good,
Was awesome.
higher than everybody else. So people didn't mind being teachers because they knew that, you know what, they're 1065, they retire, and they've got.
I just thought people joined the civil service because they were high in conscientiousness.
At Lancaster, a huge issue for the white delegation
Was
for
the
Smith
pensions?
was that the pensions would be guaranteed, and these guys wanted their pensions to be guaranteed anywhere in the world. They didn't want their pensions increased. Whatever my pension is, paid to me in the UK, paid to me in the States,
Oh, they got
and
a good deal.
and I'll be comfortable. No, not anymore. They if they're still alive, they're getting Zim dollar equivalent. But those guys, based on what the pensions used to be, were comfortable that they could go and live anywhere in the world.
So what do you make of the compensation that POSB customers are getting for their losses for the balances held in 2016 coming from the state? I think they're not the only bank. I think it's happening to a bunch of
all the
banks.
microfinance, they're starting at the bottom. All the microfinance banks have done it already. So now that POSB, eventually it's going to get to commercial banks. And everybody gets up to $1,000. So you're going to get up to $1,000 if you had $1,000 on this magical date that's announced. They're paying it out. Is it a smart idea to be paying it out?
Like I said, you know what, you create inflation and then you play victim to the same inflation. That's what government is doing. And then they want to solve the problem that they created. But you can't, the restitution is not exactly, you're not returning the person back to 2016 when this whole fiasco started. And that's the fundamental problem.
And I put it to you, why bother? So
That's ticking the boxes.
no, but like some guys come and stolen the wheels off your car. You've accepted that they've gone. You catch a guy, he goes to court, and he's going to go to jail anyway. And then he comes and says, "I'm going to give you back your wheels."
They're not actually getting back their wheels. They're getting one wheel for every 4. If that.
No. If you had less than $1,000, you get all your money. And actually, most people would have had less than $1,000. They get all their money. But people had already accepted that their wheels were stolen.
Yeah. Also, I think the bigger question and the bigger liability and the bigger moral obligation is to people who worked in government for 30, 40 years,
Exactly, the
who
pension
are
funds.
due a pension that's worthless. Right? Why are we compensating
Do
a
you
guy
remember
who
that
had
during
less than $1,000 in their account on a particular day that may or may not have paid any taxes or spent a day working in government or doing anything constructive in our country, when there's tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of retired civil servants who gave 30, 40 years of their life
That's actually a very good
in
point.
service of the government and are now destitute.
Or even in the private sector, they've also lost their pensions. There's a lot to be said. It's been an eventful week, but we must say goodbye. I must be relieved of the burden of trying to moderate between Tweedledee and Tweedledum. Always lovely having you along. And as usual, we only seek to inspire thoughts. And we hope that you raise some of these issues with people that you have access to that make policy or influence policy. Because all any of us want is a better Zimbabwe. Have a lovely weekend. Stay safe. Be good. If you can't be good at it.
Cheers to that.